All right, let's talk about something that feels, well, kind of like a superpower. We're going to break down how you can actually learn to see trouble before it happens.
Have you ever had that feeling? You know, that gut feeling that something just isn't right? It's like a little alarm bell goes off in your head, or you get that knot in your stomach. We've all been there. But what if I told you that's not just some random magic?
See, that gut feeling is actually your brain, your subconscious, picking up on a pattern that's out of place. And the best part? It's a real skill. It's something you can train. Our goal here is to show you how to read those signals consciously so you can operate before something bad happens, before what we're going to call the bang. Okay, so how do we even start to do that? How do we read those signals? Well, it all begins with a really simple but incredibly powerful idea: the timeline of trouble. First things first, what is the bang? Well, the bang is that critical moment. It's the bad thing happening. And look, it could be something super minor, like stubbing your toe, or it could be as serious as a violent attack. The scale doesn't matter. The bang is just that point of impact, the thing we're trying to avoid. So here's the key idea. Everything happens on a timeline, right? To the right of bang is after the event. That's the reactive zone. You're dealing with the consequences, cleaning up the mess. But left of bang, that's where the magic is. That's before the event. It's the proactive space where you have all the power, where you can observe, be aware, and just sidestep the bang entirely. That's where we want to live.
Okay, so how do we actually do that? How do we live left of bang? Well, it really comes down to training your brain to see things that honestly are invisible to most people. And it all starts with two really important concepts: baselines and anomalies. So, first up is the baseline. You've got to figure out what's normal for any given situation. What's the vibe? How do people usually act here? How does traffic flow? Once you have a really solid idea of what's normal, the anomalies, the things that don't fit, will practically scream at you. An anomaly is anything that makes you stop and think, what's wrong with this picture? All right, let's put this into practice. We're going to apply this idea of baselines and anomalies to our first tool, reading the room. And we're going to do that by looking at something called proxemics, which is just a fancy word for the language of space. Because, people are always voting with their feet, whether they realize it or not. Let's talk about a proxemic push. This is when you see people naturally moving away from something. They're creating distance, they're backing away from a person, a place, an object that makes them feel uncomfortable or threatened. So if you're in a crowd and you see everyone kind of subtly shifting away from one spot, your spidey senses should be tingling. You should be asking, what are they all moving away from? And of course, the opposite of that is the proxemic pull. This is when people move towards something. We're naturally drawn to things that feel safe, interesting, or attractive. So when you learn to spot these invisible currents, the pushes away from danger and the pulls towards safety, man, that's a huge step. You're basically reading the entire atmosphere of a room. Okay, so we've read the room. Now let's zoom in and read the person. This is where we get into kinesics, another fancy word, this time for body language. All those nonverbal signals our bodies are broadcasting 24/7. And this brings us to a really, really crucial idea, summed up perfectly by Gavin de Becker. Everything a person does is created twice, once in the mind and once in its execution. What does that mean? It means our intentions, our impulses, they exist in our heads before they become actions. And our bodies, they often give away those intentions before we even move. Those are the pre-incident indicators we're looking for. But, and this is super important, you can't just rely on one single tell, someone crossing their arms. They might just be cold. It could mean nothing. To really get an accurate read, you need to look for a cluster of behaviors. We're talking at least 3 different indicators that are all pointing in the same direction, telling the same story. So let's take a classic example, the uncomfortable cluster. This is all driven by our brain's natural flight response. So what are we looking for? Check out their feet. Are they pointed towards the door like they're ready to bolt? Is their body leaning away, trying to create space? Look at their shoulders. Are they hunched up by their ears, kind of like a turtle pulling into its shell? And what about little self-soothing things like rubbing their neck or wringing their hands? Like we said, any one of these things is just noise. But when you see 3 or more of them together, now you're picking up on a real, reliable signal. Okay, so you've established your baseline. You've spotted a cluster of anomalies. You've got the information. But information is totally useless if you don't do anything with it.
you need a trigger for action. And that brings us to the rule of three.
This right here, this is your trigger. It's the combat rule of three. It's simple. Once you spot three distinct anomalies, could be that weird body language cluster, could be a proxemic push in the crowd, whatever. Once you hit three, you have to do something. You act, period. Doing nothing is off the table.
So what does acting even mean for us, for regular civilians? It's a really simple decision tree, and it's in order of priority. Number one, the best option is always to run. Just get out of there, create distance. If you can't run, then you hide. Put barriers between you and the problem. And only, and I mean only, as an absolute last resort, when there is no other way out, do you fight.
And look, let's be clear. This is not about trying to be a hero or a vigilante. This is about personal safety and being responsible. You know, the founder of Krav Maga, Aimi, he put it perfectly. He said, "I want instructors to educate students to be good citizens." That's the goal. To be someone who can take care of themselves and maybe others, but to do it wisely.
At the end of the day, this whole thing, it's not about living in fear. It's not about being paranoid. It's the exact opposite. It's a framework for living with awareness. It's about turning down all the static and noise and just tuning into the signals that are already there. It's about empowering yourself to move through the world a little more safely, a little more confidently. So the only question left is, how are you going to use it?